So, hello, I'm Dr. Anastasia Badder, and I'm a research associate in the Cambridge Interfaith program and Faculty of Divinity at the University of Cambridge. I'm an anthropologist of religion, but a lot of my work moves between anthropology and education. I'm interested in interreligious encounter, including in RE classrooms in the UK, and I'm especially interested in the potential of material things to facilitate different kinds of encounters. And most recently, I've been thinking about religious ecologies and climate action as a space of religious and spiritual encounter. Joining me today is Dr. Kathryn Wright. Dr. Wright began her career teaching in East London secondary schools, after which she became a local authority RE advisor, and then a consultant for Culham St Gabriel's, leading the Teach RE course program. She's also enjoyed being an RE Quality Mark Assessor, and today she's on the board of the RE Council of England and Wales, and is the chief executive of Culham St Gabriel's, a registered charity dedicated to enhancing religious education across England and the developed nations, with a view towards building a more open and respectful society. Dr. Wright, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
So much, Anastasia. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. You've had a really varied and rich career across RE and the interfaith sector, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your insights into our interfaith futures today. So shall we dive in?
Yeah, let's do that.
Great. So the first question I wanted to open with is, how can or should thinking about RE respond to our contemporary moment, which is, I think, so marked by politicized difference, by inflammatory rhetoric, and even sometimes erupting into violence? What is the potential for RE to respond to this moment?
Yeah, so one of the reasons I became an RE teacher in the first place quite a long time ago now was because for me, RE's always been about the power of understanding. So understanding is, I believe, one of the kind of the foundations of positive, harmonious. I mean, we're particularly talking about interfaith and belief work this morning. So harmonious interfaith and belief work is rooted in really great understanding. And for me, that's what lies at the heart of RE. So within classrooms, within schools, RE provides an opportunity for children and young people with different faiths and beliefs and identities to engage with one another, to build genuine relationships and to learn from one another as well. So I suppose RE provides a space where children can encounter practices and beliefs which are perhaps different to their own, whether that be through resources. Ideally, I always think with engagement with actual real life people, if at all possible, whether that's actually in person or, great resources out there now, films, videos and so on, or using things like we're using now, like Zoom and so on. And that kind of engagement with lived experience is really essential. And I think this supports empathy and understanding of each other as human beings. There is some evidence around that, particularly around the use of contact theory in the classroom, for example. And this can combat hate and allows creativity to flourish as well between people of different backgrounds and identities. So I suppose a very broad answer to your question, but to kind of I suppose to kind of dig down into what we do right now, I think it's really important that we have considered responses. So we need to think not only about RE as well, but about the whole school, and that kind of targeted subject-specific responses kind of need, I think, to work together. I've spoken to those who are involved in kind of senior school leadership who have been really challenged about how they enable their school community to flourish and thrive for all, and how they can work together with local communities and with parents and so on as well, to combat the rhetoric that you were describing earlier. And I think RE has a really significant contribution to make to that, but it's not the only thing that's clearly needed at the moment.
Wonderful. Absolutely. I think we've seen some really strong research showing, including research supported by Culham St Gabriel's, showing that RE is really a particularly powerful space for building connections, for fostering empathy, and for maybe taking the lead on some of this multi-subject response that you referenced. Wonderful.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we Culham St Gabriel is trying to do is we see one of our roles is as a kind of networking, facilitating networking as
Mm-hmm.
well. So we have tried particularly, well, actually before the riots in the summer, and also subsequently afterwards, kind of bringing people together who are working in that space. There's some really great work happening, but often people don't know what exists out there, or don't know what each other are doing. So one of the things that we've tried to do is to bring those people together to network and talk about what they're doing, so we can identify maybe where the gaps are as well.
Absolutely. I think that's so critical. And I definitely agree, and I think it's probably the case in many areas of research that people aren't necessarily aware of what other people are working on. And we definitely can do better research and build stronger responses by coming together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Great. So maybe more generally and looking towards the future, what does or can RE offer in terms of building capacities to respond to future challenges?
Yeah, this is a great question, because Culham St Gabriel's vision is for broad-based, critical, reflective religion and worldviews education,
Mhm.
but specifically to contribute to a well-informed, respectful, open society. So right at the heart of Culham St Gabriel's is that vision, if you like, for the future of a harmonious, peaceful place where we can all thrive and learn from one another. So I believe that RE has an intrinsic value, okay, in terms of learning about the nature of religion and worldviews and so on, the development of religious and non-religious worldviews, etc. However, I do think it has value in other ways as well. I mean, we just touched a little bit on that, but a few other things which more widely than just the immediate issues that we face. One of the things I've noticed in the press is a lot of people talking about space for critical thinking in classrooms. And actually, RE does that really well. When RE's taught well, that is really done well in that space as well, and particularly children and young people becoming interpreters of religion and worldviews. I think acknowledging their own position, the position of others, and that we all stand somewhere. Okay, there's a great a film we funded actually called Nobody Stands Nowhere, but actually you need to understand your own positioning in relation to critical thinking and interpretation. So that's one of the key things. The second thing I think is that RE does provide skills for life. I mean, obviously other subjects do as well. I'm, obviously biased, but I think it helps children and young people to navigate what is an increasingly complex and probably sadly unsettled world in which we live. So provides tools for them to help navigate. So things like, for example, using different disciplinary lenses. I might come back to this a little bit more later as well. Looking at the methods that we might use to understand one another, for example, whether it's in interrogating text, or whether it's in analysing and evaluating census data. All of those kind of things are really important, I think, both in terms of understanding, but also skills that maybe employers and so on are looking for as well, in terms of those broader skills for life. And then I think the third thing, which Culham St Gabriel's has become particularly interested and involved with only in the last 2 years, actually, and that is around promoting and protecting freedom of religion or belief, or FORB for short. So Culham St Gabriel's have actually commissioned pieces of work around this. A literature review and work with some primary schools in particular. And the latter looked at what learning outcomes we might expect of children in primary schools if they were to be demonstrating and articulating freedom of religion or belief, or FORB principles, and living those out, if you like. So I think that sort of increasing sort of focus of our work's quite an interesting one, and one which we're continuing to sort of develop as well. We're hoping with Canterbury Christchurch University to set up a form and education research network, for example, to take forward some of this work and also to look at where the gaps are as well. But I think those kind of three things in particular, I hope, will help kind of going forward, if you like. Obviously, all of those things apply to the immediate, but I think for the further future as well, they're important.
I was really intrigued about what you said about learning to apply different kinds of disciplinary lenses, learning to engage different kinds of data and discussions. And I think that links really nicely actually to your first point as well about learning to examine the kinds of lenses that we all bring as our own personal positioning. And it's such a critical piece of critical thinking. Really, learning to tease apart what different kinds of lenses might offer us or allow us to see or not allow us to see, and really being aware of that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something which I've been working on with colleagues for some time, actually, prior to my current role. Became really interested in the different ways in which we are actually studying the subject. One of the phrases that is more commonly being used now in the wider RE community is kind of ways of knowing. How do we know about religion and worldviews? We do that in different ways. I mean, you're an anthropologist, but yet down the road from you are theologians or those philosophers or whatever, all bringing a different kind of perspective, I think, to play.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've heard a couple of people talk about in the RE world thinking about ontologies, epistemologies, and methodologies. So, always kind of asking what is there to know, and then how do we know? And then what are the sort of tools and approaches that we use to know that? Yeah, absolutely. I think key skills and key things to be aware of and to bring to everything we do, probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So, our next question is a little bit more targeted, I think, more specific. So what is it that policymakers need to know about RE to inform their decision making? And relatedly, is there something policymakers ought to take away from RE to inform decision making for cohesive futures? So what do they need to know to make decisions about RE? And what could they learn from RE?
Yeah, well, this kind of links back to what we've just been saying in a way. One of the things policymakers need to know is what RE is about today. I still think that not all, by any means, I don't want to generalize, but there are some policymakers who I think generally still don't really know what the subject is about. The subject has changed and shifted and continues to shift, I think, at the moment. I think we're in quite an exciting time. We're talking much more about a religion and worldviews approach to the subject, where the kind of substantive knowledge is framed particularly more around kind of diversity and lived experience, beginning with people. And we've just talked about these kind of different disciplinary approaches, different disciplinary lenses, which are kind of drivers, if you like, for the subject. So I think one of the first things that some policymakers probably need to be aware of is what the subject is actually about and what it can do, actually, the contribution that it can make, the importance for wider education, those kind of transferable skills perhaps that and knowledge actually that I think is important for the wider sort of school curriculum. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing I think is that policymakers need to be aware that the public take this really seriously. So quite often we see polls that say, RE is the least popular subject or whatever it is, but actually in 2021, so I know it is a few years ago now, we probably need to do another poll at some point. But we commissioned a poll through Savanta Comres in 2021 of a national representative group in the population to ask various questions about RE. So as a result of that, about 2/3 of adult respondents said it was important to understand the beliefs of others in everyday life, in school, in local communities and the workplace. That's a significant number of people. It's, more than just a little majority. 2/3 is quite significant. On top of that, 71% of the respondents said that they felt RE should reflect the diversity of backgrounds and beliefs today in the UK. So that reflects this kind of importance of this move, perhaps more towards the religion and worldviews approach. But also employers and employees thought, so again, about just under 2/3 thought it was really important to understand one another in the workplace. So the general public see the subject as being really important. So what might the policymakers then kind of learn, if you like, from that as well? That it's important in their context, that actually, within Parliament, within government, within the civil service, that actually religion and worldview, or religion and belief literacy, is really important in terms of making policy decisions. So we are currently funding a project that is working at developing a religion and belief literacy standard in public life. And I think that's something that hopefully they're working, this project's particularly working with civil servants, but broader than that too. And I think one of the things that government might learn is that actually the kind of the quality, where RE happens, really, really well, the quality that is happening there, the depth of understanding that children and young people are gaining is important in the policy decision-making process itself. So I think that would be sort of my key things. And then I suppose it's not really an aside as such, but at the moment, in this moment, there's a curriculum and assessment review taking place, and obviously a number of us are looking at kind of submissions that we make to that, and I think in terms of what policymakers should be taking seriously right now is securing the place of the subject really strongly, and I think taking really seriously a national content standard for RE in England. This is in England specific, I've referenced it in that way, as a benchmark for all schools. That there needs to be some kind of standard, I think, across all types of school, and I think policy makers should. There's an opportunity at this moment in time to do something about that.
Absolutely. I mean, two things I think really jumped out at me. One, the findings from the survey you conducted. I mean, I think this is absolutely something that policymakers seem to be missing and need to be aware of, that this absolutely matters to people, that people are invested in better understanding their neighbors, better understanding diverse religions and worldviews and experiences across all sort of stages of life. So not only in the classroom, but in the workforce as well. I think that's so important for policy to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say that when we set out to do the survey, the results were not what we were expecting. And they did surprise us. And when we dug down to that data from 2021, we found that there was a suggestion that parents of those who had children in school still were even more positive about the subject. So we did a second subsequent survey, again through Savanta Comres in 2022, where they asked parents specifically. So again, it was a representative sample of parents, and we were right. The results were even more. It was nearer to 3/4 of parents specifically who saw the value of the subject. And just for those who are watching or listening, the results of both those surveys are on the Culham St Gabriel's website. If people want to go and look at that, they can go and take a look and see what was found out.
Absolutely. And I think that will be really interesting for people to see, because I think sometimes we have the impression that, or maybe parents have the impression that because, from what I understand, it's at some point it becomes optional. RE becomes optional. You can withdraw. Maybe parents are inclined towards that because they don't understand what's going on in RE. But in fact, it sounds like parents are very invested in the potential of RE and the importance of it and the kind of learning that happens there for their children and for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And generally speaking, with the data, we did ask parents whether they had a particular religious or non-religious worldview as part of that, and there wasn't a lot of difference between people different, whether people had a religious or a non-religious worldview. There was a little bit, but not a lot. And again, within the religious worldview community groups, there wasn't a lot of difference. So most people, regardless of their worldview, were saying, but the majority were still saying it was positive. It was a little bit up and down, but overall, that didn't seem to make a difference either, which is also really interesting, I think. Particularly, we're thinking about interfaith, interfaith and belief, that actually there is a sense that this is really important for most people. It doesn't matter necessarily what your particular religious or non-religious belief is.
Definitely. And I mean, I think that really supports as well the idea that I think we hear more and more, that interfaith is not only about conversation and encounter between different faiths, but also between people of different faiths and no faith, and all different kinds of orientation. So wonderful, absolutely. And on to our final question. So in June 2024, a new faith and belief policy collective published an open letter to the incoming government at the time. And the letter outlines 5 shared values that contribute to a more holistic society. So those were compassion, integrity, stewardship, community, and peace and reconciliation. And what I would like to ask is, do these values, or do any of these values, resonate with your visions of RE futures? And if so, in what ways?
Yeah, this is such a great question. And both personally, but also from a Culham St Gabriel's point of view as well, these values really, really resonate with me. So I've been part of the Faith and Belief Policy Collective from its sort of when it began, from its inception, and I think they should underpin so much of what we do in our lives, just generally, let alone kind of in terms of RE. But what I found particularly interesting looking at these particular values was how much they resonated with my own research. So just very, very briefly, I did some doctoral research. It's actually took quite a long time, 7 years to do my doctoral research. But it was looking at what pedagogical approaches were appropriate in Church of England schools in particular. At the time, I was working as a diocesan advisor for some of my time. And I was really interested in what approaches we might take to teaching the subject. And I completed that in 2018, but in the last couple of years, I've gone back to my research and just reframed it a little bit in light of largely lots of the other things we've talked about, Anastasia, in our discussion. So I've now kind of framed it as a kind of a hospitable approach to teaching the subject. And the kind of the 3 kind of principles that I talk about are creating space, encountering others, and listening for wisdom. And they're rooted in a Christian theology of hospitality. Although I think that a lot of the 3 principles I think can apply beyond potentially Church of England schools as well. But there was one particular analogy that I use in my research, and actually the title of my research is A Pedagogy of Embrace. And I use this analogy of an embrace throughout the thesis. And there's a quote, which I'm going to read actually to you, from Miroslav Volf, who's a Croatian Protestant theologian. And this is how he describes an embrace. And for me, this sums up kind of my vision for RE future. And I think it connects to the values, and I'll explain a bit about that. But this is the quote. So actually, I'm going to read it if that's okay. I think it's quite powerful. So, in an embrace, I open my arms to create space in myself for the other. Open arms are a sign that I do not want to be by myself only, an invitation for the other to come in and feel at home with me. In an embrace, I also close my arms around the other. Closed arms are a sign that I want the other to become part of me, while at the same time I maintain my own identity. By becoming part of me, the other enriches me. In a mutual embrace, none remains the same, because each enriches the other. yet both remain true to their genuine selves. Now, I think, well, for me, this is such a powerful image. And if we think about the values that you were just talking about, for me, that sense of compassion comes through here in the sense of kind of being there for someone, if you see what I mean, in terms of embracing somebody. So being there for the one that you are embracing, if you like. There's a sense of compassion there. There's a really strong sense of integrity because, as Wolf says, you're being true to yourself. You are not becoming the other person that you're embracing. You maintain your own identity, yet you are embracing someone else's at the same time. So there's that sense of integrity there, I think, in an embrace. Stewardship, perhaps a bit more tenuous in a way, but actually stewardship can be about time as well as about money and things. And when you are in embrace with somebody, then actually you are giving your time, your space, if you like, to another person. So I think there is a sense of kind of stewardship there. Community, clearly, the whole idea of an embrace is about being with other people. So knowing that you are enriched by others as well, that actually being with other people is an enriching experience. And I think that's really important in the interfaith and belief space. And then lastly, kind of that peace and reconciliation that you referenced, that kind of sense. I love in Wolf's quote where he says, an invitation for the other to come in and feel at home with me. There is, there's nothing more strongly, I don't think, that talks about a sense of peace or reconciliation, of knowing that you are completely and utterly welcomed by someone else. So those values to me are vital. But I think for me that analogy of an embrace just has sat with me for a very long time now. I came across it quite early in my doctoral studies, which was kind of in, what was it, about 2010, I think, when I started. So it's kind of sat with me for a long time. And I have the quote up on my board because it constantly reminds me, I think, not just about what RE is about, but about what our lives should be about in terms of the relationship we should have, we can foster with other people, I think.
That was so beautiful, this idea of the pedagogy of embrace and this notion of embrace as a process of kind of holding the potential for, or being open to the potential for, really being transformed and encountering somebody else. And maintaining your, sort of maintaining that integrity. You're still true to yourself, but potentially transformed, taking on a new perspective, or by meeting somebody else and being open to that.
Absolutely. And I think, it was only really as I was sort of talking it through now that I thought, gosh, this is actually a really powerful analogy, which I hadn't really thought about before, for interfaith dialogue and encounter and so on as well. That actually sometimes we can be not necessarily afraid, but perhaps reticent to have encounters with people that have a different worldview to us, because we're worried that they might be trying to make us become like them. But actually, that may be the case in some instances. We should be clear about that. But I think in the vast majority, particularly people who are involved in that interfaith space, really want to be enriched. And through those encounters, as you say, kind of be transformed, not necessarily in changing one's belief or anything like that, but actually in terms of those personal developments and that enrichment of life, of learning from other people, I think is a really powerful one. So yes, perhaps the embrace analogy is a useful one for the interfaith and belief sector as well. Definitely.
Yeah, I think all of the kind of values and orientations that notion brings along with it, are really powerful for the interfaith space, and for thinking about interreligious encounter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much again for joining me today, Dr. Wright, and for a really lovely conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And let's hope Interfaith Week, brings some of those embracing encounters that we've just described as well for people.
Absolutely. We can certainly hope so.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great.